This show is planned. I had started out with a new loom, and I was trying to work with bigger pieces. And I had a series in mind. In particular, I was interested in space. I learned as a very young child, in order to be safe, that you make myself as small as possible and crawl into the tiniest little spaces. And I wanted to do a piece of artwork and a series of artworks that would just kind of open up and let me take the space around me and to be able to fill that up. So I started out with a big sweep, and the more pieces that I made and the more gestures that came out, I learned a lot about space itself. I learned that, like a slinky, you take a slinky and you do it down, you can see the contours of the movement itself, or in a Star Wars lightsaber or something like that, you could actually see the gesture and the movement, and I found that kind of fascinating. And so I tended to make sculptures that had a directional gesture to it, or a particular movement, and I just started having fun with that. It's a way of dancing without dancing. One of the most exciting things about artwork in any media is how a piece has movement and gesture, even though it's stationary on the wall, and that's a very fascinating thing to me. And I think it harkens back to that little girl who's trying to make herself teeny tiny. And how can you move in that teeny tiny little space? Well, you can, but it's much more subtle. And then if you could just open up a little bit and a little bit and a little bit more, then it actually becomes something fulfilling. I've only been doing this kind of weaving for about 3 years, and I was still practicing with the different kinds of warps and wefts you can have in a weaving, and the different spaces between the warps and the wefts, and then how that fit together, and then putting in different fibers. And so when I ended up with this big long piece of fabric, I was probably about 6 feet long, and it was very loosely woven, and as I tried just playing with it, it ended up being that, and it's called With Open Arms, because it just opened up that whole series for me. This particular series and collection, I wanted to take the same basic weaving technique and pattern and see how I could make a multitude of different shapes and sizes and actually sculpt different forms and shapes out of it. I let each piece kind of move into the next one, as I always work. That's just my modus operandi. I have some that I took fabric and cut it into strips and then used that as my weft thread. It makes a very, very different kind of textile in the end than weaving with just wool yarn or with hemp. And the ones with the fabric and the ones with the wool, they have entirely different personalities. So I would often switch back and forth between one personality and another personality as a way to kind of keep myself moving forward. At the beginning, I was doing combined materials, where I would have a certain amount of weft space with fabric and a certain amount of weft space with wool. And in working in space and working with space, I came to learn how to use the drape of the textile, the finished textile, and some textiles just drape more fluidly with one or the other. And that is what makes its personality, is the natural drape of the fabric itself. There's a piece called Lullaby. It's made entirely in wool, and it's gradiated colors put together, and then it just sort of fell into its own little draping pattern, and putting just the most minimal of supports behind it to hold it into that shape. It was a much different feel than having the one with open arms, which just hang so fluidly and so loosely all by itself. I am really enjoying it, actually. I surprise myself when I don't do shows very often, so when I do come up with one collection, it's like, oh, I didn't realize this what this looked like, and oh, isn't this fun? And I can enjoy the enjoyment.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite piece out of all those?
Oh my goodness. No, it changes from day to day. I'm really impressed with the last one in the series, which is called Slippery Slope, which is in the front lobby. And it just fell into place by itself, and everything from the warp of the wood to the overlapping of weaves and values, and the way it stands out from the wall and carries itself with very little bits of thread that just kind of hold it together. And it looks delicate, but it's very solid, and that it still impresses me when I look at it. But then some of the fabric ones do too. It's like, wow, I really did that. Isn't that amazing? The ones I'm actually working on now, that I'm starting to work on now, are using different frames. Like, I've worked with a lot of different circles to fill in circles in many different ways. So the Slippery Slope was, I made a wooden frame and then wrapped it with the fiber, and so each frame was its own bit. And so the circle pieces that I'm working with now, each frame is its own bit, and it's early days, so I don't really know where it's going to go from there. There's a huge satisfaction in allowing myself to do a project that takes, a couple of weeks instead of a couple of hours, and to stick with it, and that again is part of the space. It's part of the mind space of being able to stay in that place for long enough to allow myself to grow and develop from within. Patience is a huge thing, and not giving up on what it is that waiting until it completes itself. So a certain amount of perseverance and patience that goes into doing a larger piece, and allowing oneself to have the freedom, and to take the freedom to just do a lot more play with something in particular. Rather than playing in my mind, I'm playing with actual pieces and tangible items, and it's very much more concrete and a tactile kind of exercise than a visual and a mind exercise. Because so much of what I do is tactile and visual put together, but sometimes more tactile than visual, it's soft and it's comforting and it's right there, and it's warm and it's comforting. I need to have some comfort. We all do. So that's why I stick with it. Fiber pieces are more, maybe cliche to say it, but it's more the fabric of my life and the way I am as a person, and weave myself in and out of society and in and out of people's lives and theirs into mine. My really only goal in doing this was to explore space, and that's what sculpture does anyways. So using the sculptural format with a larger piece of fabric or textile that I've woven myself, kind of developed as I worked with it over time, then it was just as playful and organic as it had been in the past. I hope they walk away with a looseness about them, that they'll feel that it is a dance. That's what weaving is to me. It's a dance between not only threads and fibers and shapes and draping, but it's a way of moving in space and holding oneself and being open to the spaces around oneself.